they had some German dive bombers hitting Casablanca at that time, and so they hit general quarters. Well, all the passengers, which, well, the plane was loaded with aviation gasoline and depth charges, and the passengers were made aware that if they were ever under attack, they were to go to a hallway and lay down in the hallway. That was their general quarters. The general quarters of the crew would go to their gun mounts and such as that for protection and in the operation. So when the general quarters sounded, and that's that beep, 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 and such by, and then the announcement, all passengers go to your general quarters. It didn't last long, about maybe 15 to 20 minutes, and we heard a few bombs blasting, and that was it. That was the only time I had any aircraft trying to bomb us. So,
And that was right when you got there, you said?
that's right when we got there.
So how about your experience with the native people in Morocco? Like, I mean, how were you able to interact with them? What was your experience with them?
Well, we had them on the base. After we were on the base for a while, we had 2,000 Italian prisoners moved in, and we had to guard them. I didn't have to guard them; that was not my responsibility. But they were on the base, and at first they were behind barbed wire areas, and they were controlled. But after a while, after Italy was taken care of and Mussolini committed suicide or was killed, I guess he was killed, they were relaxed and they could move around the base as freely as they wanted to. But as far as the native people, they had Arabs on the base for work details and such as that. But those Arabs spent most of their time stealing things, and they'd do everything they could to hide them in their clothes. They'd put them in their clothes and then sew their clothes up to hide them. They'd, if you had any clothes on a clothesline that you had washed or something like that, and you found them missing, well, you knew where they went. And they moved in and out of the gate, and usually they were searched, going both ways and such. It was French Morocco, but there were French and there were Spanish people there. The French people and the Spanish people that I was acquainted with were just very, very fine, like my next door neighbors. And the Arabs that I met and knew, I just took them as just common individuals. I didn't meet any that were knowingly bad. But then, Port Lyote was small. If you went to Rabat, which was the capital, and if you went into the Medina, which we were restricted from, but we would go in anyway, lots of things went on in there that you would be very hesitant about. houses of prostitution, gambling, and one thing and another. Just anything you wanted, you could look for, you could find there. Some of the streets in those, the Medina were maybe that wide, you know, and slime on the streets, no sewage. Somewhere along the line, if I remember, someone said that the average lifespan in the Medinas was like 28 years. And you go through there and get that feeling that it's probably fairly accurate. But among the French and the Spanish, it was kind of similar to where I grew up. Some of the people there were just exceptionally fine.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember that was kind of one of the things that you were talking about a lot, was just your experience with the native people, and just that you did have a really pleasant experience, for the most part.
Yes. I remember them fondly. But then I think I told you that the French people of the town and the Spanish, they kept their youngsters away from the town. You didn't see any of the French girls in the town available for any association with the sailors or the Marines. Their concept was such that the sailors and the Marines that were available were not looking for a lasting relationship with their children. They were out for a good time, and that meant liquor and women, such as that. But, we did have some association with some of the French women and the Spanish women. Were invited to the chief of fish merchant's home for an evening, and met his daughters. They were just very fine. Yep.
Just to get some positive association.
Very, very fine, yeah. His name was Paul Valea. He had 2 fishing boats, and they'd go out, and our base was on like a peninsula, or at least the river ran and made a peninsula out of the base. And that boat would sail out to the Atlantic Ocean and fish, and then work its way back in and bring its wares, and then sell its fish. And I would see Paul every now and then. He couldn't speak English, and no matter how we tried, we couldn't teach him English. But good memories.
Yeah, that's good. So now, I remember you were talking a bit about your experience. You grew up in Brooklyn, and you grew up during the Depression, right? I mean, what were some of the things you experienced?
Well, growing up during the Depression, I was born in 25. And I guess the Depression hit in 29. Things were pretty hard, pretty rough. People didn't have any money. I remember my allowance was a nickel on Sunday mornings. I used that nickel to buy a Pepsi-Cola for 3 cents and a piece of gum for a penny, and saved the penny during the week for another one. it's hard to realize how much you can do without. You go to school and you don't see anybody with new clothes. Now, during the Depression, well, I guess my neighborhood, a lot of the people, the Italians were the first group. They came through Ellis Island. They spoke Italian, couldn't speak English, so when they came to America, they gathered in clusters. They went where they could be understood. And there were no supermarkets. There was a grocery store, and there was a bakery, and each individual store, little stores. The butcher was just a butcher. Didn't have any other item in his store but meats and such. The fish market. My mother came through Ellis Island, but she came from Norway, and she spoke broken English. And so the Italians spoke broken English. When I come home from school, the Italian kids started to play. I had to go out and shop. No refrigerators, ice boxes. You can't keep things too long, so you bought daily. And I would have a list. I'd have to go to the butcher's and the vegetable store and whatnot, and take them home, then for Mother to make supper. It just seemed like prices, just hard for people to realize that what it cost, but then there was no money coming in. A nickel for a bucket of apples. They had a place that, as far as welfare was concerned, I lived on McDougall Street, and about 3 blocks south, Fulton Street, there was an empty store, but the city kind of used it. And for the people who wanted to, or the people that had to, you could line up there. You didn't have to have any ID, but you just tell them how many were in your family, and they would let you have some hard bread, stale bread, and some cabbage. And a lot of people lived on cabbage and stale bread. Another incident that might help you. I remember my mother took me up to, we lived a half a block from PS 73, Public School 73. And it tried to enroll me in school. And the principal came in and said to my mother, "We can't have him enrolled here." And she didn't understand, but he explained to her that we use kindergarten to teach the Italian kids English, and your child can speak English. So they sent me home. I didn't get to go to kindergarten. So I started in first grade. And then my first grade teacher was a big black woman. I don't know whether you remember Aunt Jemima, a big black woman on TV or something. That's what she looked like. And I remember I'd go, and my mother had walked me to school, and when my mother left, I would run out. I don't know whether it was 2 or 3 weeks. I ran out of school 2 or 3 weeks. Finally, Mother took me, and she had to sit in the room with me to keep me in school. That woman scared the heck out of me. But I got to where I liked her, and I stood there.
Good.
Yeah, 2 or 3 months after school started, and I was worked into where I stood there. Mother thought she'd come up, and she did. She walked into the room and she couldn't find me. And she looked at, the teacher's name was Nurse. She looked at Miss Nurse, and Mrs. Nurse looked at my mother and looked to the side, and I was sitting on a stool, a tall stool, with a narrow cone-shaped hat on, the dunce chair. I don't know what I had done, but there I was. Yeah.
I mean, pretty a little bit rebellious as a little kid, right?
Well, I don't know. I must have done something.
Yeah, I think most of us have ended up in that position at some point.
At some
As a
point,
little kid.
oh, I had problems, but you know, the older Italian that came through Ellis Island, everybody in my neighborhood was dark. My hair was blonde but almost white. My nickname was Whitey. As I look back, I think that the older Italians, because it just seemed like they had the greatest respect for me. I think they looked at me as perhaps the epitome of what an American should be or look like. And I think here they came to America for freedom's sake, to have a new life, and they kind of maybe pictured me as an American. But I was just like they were. I mean, I ran and played, and yet, if a Jewish person moved into the neighborhood, they didn't last. Some of them only lasted 2 or 3 days. The Italians would throw bricks through their windows, calling them Christ killers. If a German came in, same thing.
Pretty passionate people then.
Oh, what? And I was perplexed at that, really perplexed. I never did have a feeling against the Jew or the German or anything else. Always felt sorry for them. Why would they do this? But then, see, I never went to church. The only religion I had, my mother would talk to me and worked out a little prayer that I said at bedtime. And I had a grandmother that kind of introduced me to some religion and got mad at her son, my dad. When I was 12 years old, she really raised the riot act to my dad. And she took me down to her church, which was about I don't know, 8 or 9 blocks away from home, out of our neighborhood. The pastor was Pastor Gongray, and they were starting a new class. And youngsters to study the catechism. The church was Grace Gospel. I remember we had a book, I don't know how many